The transatlantic slave trade, a dark chapter in human history, 16th to 19th century. The transatlantic slave trade remains one of the most horrifying examples of systemic exploitation and dehumanization in history, spanning over 3 centuries. This trade forcibly removed an estimated 12 to 15 million African men, women, and children from their homelands, transporting them under inhumane conditions across the Atlantic Ocean to work as slaves in the Americas. The effects of this trade were devastating, leaving a legacy of social, economic, and cultural destruction that continues to shape societies today. The process began with the capture of Africans, often through violent raids, wars, or as a result of local leaders trading prisoners of war for European goods. Captives were marched for miles chained together to coastal forts where they were held in cramped, dark dungeons. These forts, such as Cape Coast Castle in present-day Ghana, became symbols of the horrors of the trade. People were stripped of their identities, reduced to mere commodities, and prepared for shipment to the New World. The journey across the Atlantic, known as the Middle Passage, was one of the most brutal phases of the trade. Slaves were packed tightly into the holds of ships with little room to move or even breathe. Living conditions were appalling. They were provided with minimal food and water, and sanitation was non-existent. Disease ran rampant, with dysentery, smallpox, and scurvy claiming countless lives. The stench of death and suffering permeated the ships, and it is estimated that between 15% and 20% of the captives perished before even reaching the Americas. For many, the trauma began long before they set foot on the ships, and for those who survived, the horrors only escalated upon arrival. Once in the Americas, enslaved people were sold at auctions like livestock, with their physical attributes and perceived abilities determining their market value. Families were routinely separated, with no regard for their emotional bonds. Men, women, and children were sent to plantations to work from dawn until dusk, often under brutal conditions. On sugar plantations in the Caribbean, life expectancy for an enslaved person was often less than 10 years, due to the extreme physical demands and harsh punishments. Resistance to slavery was constant, both overt and covert. Revolts such as the Haitian Revolution, 1791-1804, proved that enslaved people could and did fight back against their oppressors. Others resisted through smaller acts of defiance, such as work slowdowns, sabotage, or preserving their cultural traditions, despite efforts to erase them. Spirituals, dances, and oral histories became vital tools of resistance, helping to sustain hope and identity amidst unimaginable suffering. By the late 18th century, the moral and economic arguments against slavery began to gain traction. Abolitionist movements grew stronger, led by figures like Olaudah Equiano, Frederick Douglass, and William Wilberforce. In 1807, Britain became the first major power to outlaw the transatlantic slave trade, followed by other European nations. However, the practice of slavery persisted in many countries, particularly in the United States, where it was not abolished until 1865, following the Civil War. Despite the legal end of slavery, the repercussions of the transatlantic slave trade remain deeply ingrained in the fabric of modern society. The descendants of enslaved people often face systemic racism, economic inequality, and cultural marginalization. African nations, meanwhile, were left weakened by the loss of millions of their population and the disruption of their social and economic structures. The transatlantic slave trade is a somber reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty, as well as the resilience and strength of those who endured it. It calls us to confront the injustices of the past, honor the lives lost, and strive for a world that values dignity, equality, and justice for all.